A Day in the Life of a Widow. Chapter 1. Waking Up to Silence. It was early morning, and the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow across the room. Emily opened her eyes, feeling the familiar emptiness beside her. The bed, once warm with her husband's presence, was cold and undisturbed. She reached over to the other side, a habit she couldn't seem to break, as if hoping to feel him there, just for a moment. Her husband, Peter, had passed away 6 months ago. It was sudden, a heart attack that no one had expected. One moment he was there, laughing at a joke they shared over dinner, and the next, he was gone. The house felt so big now, the silence deafening at times. But Emily had learned to live with it, though the ache in her chest never fully disappeared. She slowly pulled herself out of bed and slipped on her slippers. The mornings were the hardest. She looked out the window, the world outside going on as if nothing had happened. Cars drove by, birds chirped, and the neighbors across the street were already out walking their dog. Life continued, even if hers felt like it had stopped. Emily took a deep breath and made her way to the kitchen. The house was quiet, just the way it always was now. She missed the sound of Peter's voice, the way he would hum while making coffee, or the way he'd tap his fingers on the table when he was deep in thought. Those little things had filled the house with life. Now, it was just her and the echoes of what once was. As she prepared her morning coffee, the familiar routine brought a small sense of comfort. It was one of the few things that remained the same. She took her cup and sat by the window, staring out at the garden Peter had loved so much. The flowers were still blooming, but they didn't seem as vibrant without him there to admire them. Chapter 2. A World of Memories. The house was filled with memories. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall reminded her of Peter. They had been married for 30 years, a lifetime of shared moments, both big and small. Emily often found herself wandering through the house, her fingers brushing over the framed photographs, each one telling a story of their life together. There was the picture from their wedding day, Peter's eyes sparkling with joy as he looked at her. Then there was the one from their first vacation together, standing by the beach, the wind in their hair. Each photo captured a moment in time, a piece of the life they had built together. In the evenings, when the loneliness was most intense, Emily would sit in the living room and go through old photo albums. It was her way of holding onto Peter, of keeping him close even though he was no longer there. She would laugh at the silly pictures, smile at the happy ones, and sometimes she would cry. But even in her tears, there was a sense of peace. These memories were hers, and no one could take them away. Chapter 3. The Garden. The garden had always been Peter's sanctuary. He loved spending hours outside, tending to the flowers and plants, making sure everything was just right. Emily wasn't much of a gardener herself, but after Peter's passing, she felt a responsibility to keep it alive, to honor him in that way. Every morning, after her coffee, she would step outside and walk through the garden. The scent of roses filled the air, and the vibrant colors of the flowers seemed to bring a small spark of life to her otherwise quiet days. She would kneel down, pulling out weeds and watering the plants, just as Peter had taught her. It was hard work, but it gave her something to focus on, something to care for. There was one particular rose bush that Peter had been especially proud of. He had planted it the year they moved into the house, and every spring, it bloomed with the most beautiful pink roses. Emily made sure to give it extra attention, as if caring for it was a way to keep Peter's memory alive. One day, as she was trimming the rose bush, she found herself talking to Peter, as if he were standing right beside her. "I'm doing my best," she whispered. "I know I'll never be as good at this as you were, but I'm trying." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, Emily could almost imagine that it was Peter, answering her in his gentle way. She smiled, a small tear slipping down her cheek. The garden was her connection to him, a place where she could feel his presence even in his absence. Chapter 4: The Cat. Whiskers, their cat, had been Peter's favorite. The gray tabby had been with them for nearly 10 years, and Peter had always been the one to spoil him with treats and attention. After Peter passed, Whiskers seemed to sense the loss. He would often sit by the front door, waiting for Peter to come home, not understanding why he never did. In the months since Peter's death, Whiskers had become Emily's companion. The once independent cat now followed her around the house, curling up beside her as she read or sitting on her lap as she watched TV. It was as if the cat knew that Emily needed the comfort, and in his own way, he was grieving too. One evening, as Emily sat on the couch, Whiskers jumped up beside her, nudging her hand with his head. She stroked his soft fur, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. "It's just us now, isn't it?" she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The cat purred in response, and for a moment, the emptiness didn't feel so overwhelming. They were both missing Peter, but they had each other. In the quiet moments, when the house felt too big and too empty, Whiskers was a reminder that Emily wasn't completely alone. Chapter 5: Learning to Live Again. Grief is a strange thing. It comes in waves, sometimes crashing over you with such force that it feels like you might drown, and other times, it's a quiet, constant presence, like a shadow that never quite leaves. Emily had learned to live with it, though some days were harder than others. But she had also learned that life didn't stop, even when it felt like it should. The world kept turning, and slowly, Emily found herself moving forward too. It wasn't easy, and there were days when all she wanted to do was stay in bed and forget the world existed. But she knew Peter wouldn't want that for her. He had always been full of life, and he would want her to keep living, even without him. She started to find small joys in the everyday moments. A cup of tea on a rainy afternoon, a good book, a walk through the neighborhood. These little things, while not grand or extraordinary, brought a sense of normalcy to her days. She also began to reach out to friends and family, something she hadn't done much in the months after Peter's passing. At first, it was difficult. Conversations felt forced, and she didn't know how to talk about anything other than her grief. But over time, she found herself laughing again, sharing stories, and even making plans for the future. Chapter 6: Moving Forward. It's said that time heals all wounds, but Emily wasn't sure if that was entirely true. Time had passed, and the pain wasn't as sharp as it once was, but it was still there, a dull ache that never really went away. But she had learned to live with it, to carry it with her as she moved forward. She knew that Peter would always be a part of her, that their life together had shaped her in ways she couldn't even begin to explain. But she also knew that she couldn't live in the past forever. She had to keep going, for herself and for Peter. As she sat in the garden one evening, the sun setting in the distance, Emily felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't okay yet, and maybe she never would be completely. But she was learning to live again, to find strength in the small things, and to carry Peter's memory with her, not as a burden, but as a source of comfort. The world kept turning, and Emily kept moving forward, one day at a time.